welcome to another episode of Houston Art Tribe. I am Kay Sarver, and I am here today with Lydia Bodnar-Balahutrak in her studio. And what a great studio, by the way. This is something I've been looking forward to for so long. And I guess I do this with everyone, but I'm just going to go back to when I first saw your work and when I first was aware of you. And you had done a talk at, it was a portraiture, I believe, and you had a book.
Yes.
Yes, and I think it was the WIVLA, Women in the Visual Literary Arts.
Yes.
So that goes back a lot of years, but that was my first recognition of you. And then later, I think it was probably this work. You had done it it was a gallery on 11th Street, I believe.
Yes, Now House.
Now House, okay.
Right.
Which was a
Dan Allison was the owner.
I see.
And the director. And yes, it was a very cozy gallery.
Yeah, it was.
And he actually even included sofas and a coffee table, and the book was on that, and people came and talked, as well as went through the exhibition.
It was so powerful too to see these large pieces on those walls, because it was high enough ceilings to deal with that. But that's when my socks were really knocked off.
Well, that's thrilling for me to hear, because actually that particular approach to my work, I've continued. Yeah. So, in fact, this piece that is behind us was not in the show. It came afterwards.
Okay.
Because the show was in, I believe, 2011.
Yes.
And this is about an event that took place 2013.
Okay.
But it was the catalyst, and it was, Dan came to the studio and saw my very large unstretched canvases, 10 feet high, largely of trees. And that's when he asked, and we agreed to have an exhibition.
Yes.
And so I was thrilled to see the work. He I think, is a master in installing work.
Yes, yes.
And actually getting people out to come and look at it.
Yes, I know. He does get around with that, doesn't he?
But and it was called Hide and Seek. That was the title of the show, and that pretty much is the title of this continuing series of works, where I start out with collage of text and mementos, and in this case actually articles about certain events. And I follow that by clipping articles from print publications. Yeah. And I still feel that that's vetted and a better way of documenting events.
Yeah.
So they include photo images and articles and headlines.
Yes.
And for me, after a while, I work retroactively. This has to do with the takeover land grab of Crimea in Ukraine and the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. And to document and collect the information as it began with the little green men showing up in Crimea, and then through the Olympic Games in Russia, Sochi, where at that time the revolution in Ukraine took place on the Maidan, and the corrupt president Yanukovych of Ukraine fled to Russia. And so, of course, afterwards, Putin decided to invade Ukraine. And the war is still going on in eastern Ukraine.
Oh my gosh.
So it's an ongoing war. And another thing about how words are used. When this was first reported on, it was a skirmish, something like that. And actually, it's a war. And it's still ongoing. So this fascinates me too, in collecting information about a certain event that's in play, because I do this for past events also. especially from Ukraine's history. But in current events, to collect information and follow the information, and where it even appears in certain papers, from the Wall Street Journal to the New York Times, and they're only papers that I actually read and clip. So when it comes time at some point to lay them out and look at all these, it's instructive for me to see how what was maybe perhaps on the front page is irrelevant now. And what was called heroic is not. And also how these various things come together. I find similarities between points of view, and so I present an overall point of view, but of course, just by virtue of selecting things, you know, the artist makes their point of view clear.
And you know, it's so amazing to me is before the viewer even knows, you know, I mean, you can see there's something behind these, but maybe when you first see them from across the room, you're not quite sure, and then it pulls you in because of the beauty of everything else you've done, the painting, the, you know, whatever other techniques you're putting into it. And then you come up and you see some key words or a vision of a photograph of something, and you're like, whoa, this is, but the beauty, it just allows you to take it in without a shock value, you know. It just, I thought, you know.
Well, I very much appreciate your thought, because actually my goal in all of this, I'm an artist, and so the way that I use the material and the choices I make with the material, I'm still very much aware of the design and how the use of the material and the aesthetic experience that I and the viewer may have. So it's not meant to be in your face kind of, you know, messaging. But I like the hidden nature of any work. I love looking at artwork from a distance and seeing what one sees at a distance, and then being pulled in to see those things that you can't really know from a distance. And that's very much like how we come to view the world, how we come to learn about our place in the world. From a distance, how we assess things, and then digging deeper what is there and what may be distorted and what may be repeated endlessly or embellished. So the hide and seek is, I think, a way of being in touch with and communicating.
It's a perfect title. I mean, when I first saw the title, I thought, you know, you'd think of a children's game, but it honestly is perfect, because it just, the impact, that subtle impact has so much more lasting power, I think, you know. And like you said, it sort of pulls you in, and then you really see what's going on.
Well, I hope so. This particular work is called And Europe Was Silent, and it was in the faculty show at the Glassell School of Art, where I teach. And it was hung by the auditorium on the first floor. And I remember being on the second floor, looking down, and there were 4 young people looking at it. And they were very diverse, you know, obviously from various parts of the world. And I just stopped and was watching them, because it's not often that an artist gets to watch somebody look at their work and not know that the artist is present. They feel that they're completely, which could be good or bad.
Yeah, that's true.
But they were moving in and moving away, and then somebody was pointing to something and the others drew in. So they were actually reading some of the images in between and conversing among themselves. So I managed to walk down the stairs and just stand next to them. They said, look at this, do you know the artist? And I said, I'm the artist.
Oh.
And they were then full of questions.
I bet,
And
yeah.
one young man was from Turkey, and the woman also was from the Mideast, and then there was a young man from China, and also Korea, I
Wow.
believe. So it was a completely, and they knew, especially, they knew what had happened, and they understood what was being said, and
Oh
they
my
were.
gosh.
And they were really delighted that they could see an artwork in somebody, because after we talked and I told them who I am and
Yeah.
where I came from, that actually addressed those kinds of issues,
Yes.
not in a very overt political way necessarily, but through other means.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
So for me, they were students at UH.
Oh wow.
Who came over the weekend
To
to
see
see
the
this
show.
faculty exhibition.
Oh my gosh.
So I lucked out because that gave me a real boost.
Yeah.
That first of all, that these young people really take an interest in the world beyond their own
Yes.
frame of reference.
Yeah.
And that they are students at the University of Houston, and they make a point to go around the city and explore.
Yeah.
And that they could actually spend time with any given artwork like this.
It's wonderful.
So that was a real boost for me.
That's
And
encouraging to hear that.
anything we do is from our frame of reference. And
True.
and I actually did a series of small nests with a bird and
I love
coins and stamps that
Yeah.
that really symbolize certain countries and certain ways of life. And where the beak is partially open and about to enter the bird's mouth,
Yes.
beak, that you become what you're fed, and
That's-
and you can dismiss some of it, and you can rebel against it, but actually it does influence you nonetheless, and you have to acknowledge that. And you may
Yes.
embrace it or adapt it or change it, but it makes you who you are.
Yes.
And that does not mean that in presenting one's point of view that you're dismissing others.
No. No.
And the beauty of this exchange, this particular exchange with these young people, for them I think also was that we from all parts of the world, and of course different ages, generations for me,
Yes, yes.
could communicate and could actually, it could bring us together. And it initiated Discourse, which is one of my title of my exhibition at Galveston was Discourse.
Yes.
Because that's really what
Yes.
I hope my work engenders.
Yes, yes. I think so. I mean, I think you could definitely, I mean, I hate to put titles on things, but you know, you're a bit of an activist through your art, and yet it's very subtle. It sometimes more so than others. I saw
Right.
some of those, the nest pieces, which loved them, and of course, just first seeing the animal or the bug or the mosquito,
Right.
or whatever they were, but then seeing the coin or just reference to things that maybe I didn't even understand, but realized you were making a statement about something, and then I'd see some print behind them, or
Right.
so they were beautifully done, strong work, and that idea of the nest. You know.
Yes. Well, thank you for the nest idea came about actually after my first trip to Ukraine, which is the home of my parents. They fled Ukraine during World War II. And that happened in 1991 when Ukraine was still part of the Soviet Union. In any case, when the Soviet Union fell, and it was shortly after that, they issued coupons to Ukraine, which was temporary money.
Wow.
And so the subsequent trip, and these coupons then became worthless when the real money was issued.
Oh, of
Hreuni.
course.
So I came home with a lot of coupons and had this idea of collaging them and painting a nest over them, incorporating them with an egg that is the nest egg, which, nest egg.
I see. I knew there was something.
So it's one thing, and one doesn't need to know that, but this was what I did to all the coupon notes that I had.
Yes.
And then the idea of what kind of nest it was. It was a thorny nest, it was this kind of nest, there was 1 egg in there was 3 eggs in there.
Yes.
And again, that hide and seek, where some of the imagery that was in the coupon, which I think currency is always fascinating, what images are included, what is the verbiage.
True.
And because of the size, they were very small.
Yeah.
9 by 9 inches. But one thing led to another. Then, of course, the eggs, the hatching of fledglings from the eggs. And then not all nests are wonderful, because there are such things as snake nests.
True.
Which introduced Putin into the picture as a snake. So it grew, and other animals then entered the fray, and I became fascinated with, like a mosquito that's a pest, but that what one can say or allude to by using animals that we associate with a certain kind of behavior, or a certain kind of look, and tell a fable that is acceptable, that isn't in your face, and that actually can be comical.
Yes, that's true.
So my last series in the Redbud Gallery show that I just had
Brilliant
were
series.
the four if it quacks like a duck, if it looks like a duck. So there was a reference to things happening in this country too. And there I used a political cartoon that had to do with the collusion between U.S. and Russia.
Yes.
The same one, but I painted over it so that it's barely visible. But that was the ground upon which these duckies.
I love that. I love that show. Just recently at Redbud that you had, and I have to say that when I first walked in the room, and I was like, oh, there's animals, and the imagery, and the animals, and then I get closer to see what's going on, and for instance, the dog lifting his leg. I loved that, and wow.
And the titles for those pieces are important to me, because they give a clue to at least what the impetus for me was to make this work. And for some people that's wonderful, and for some people they don't necessarily like that. But again, the artwork itself has to be the draw. So the imagery really is the most important thing to me. And then what is hidden and what really is at the heart, let's say, of the work. And some of them, even if I didn't have the title to give you a clue, they're a little bit more obvious than others. But it's my way too of bearing witness to what is going on. And those works are like comments, little comments.
Totally.
And then these are more, like novels, or they take in much more time, and they're layered more in time and in material. And then there are bigger pieces than this, which takes a lot of time and thought, and the adding and the subtracting of material. And most of them evolve over time. I don't have a definite idea of what the image is. I may have a vague idea. The metaphor being like a nest, or trees, like a veil of trees, or this fallen tree. But exactly what it's going to look like in the end,
you're not.
It's kind of improvisational.
I think that's part. That you just sort of described what I think the creative process is for a lot of us, because you're intrigued by something, or something kind of gets you going, and and then it goes somewhere you didn't expect, or
Right.
even further than you expected, and which is really great. That brings me to something about you that I love, that you really are a multimedia artist in a way, I think.
I think after that first trip to Ukraine, it was a turning point.
Imagine.
Because up to that point, I loved drawing the figure and painting the figure. I did portraits. I loved to capture the state of being, sort of human dignity. And I grew up within the Byzantine Rite church rituals because my father's father was a priest.
Oh.
So as a child, I often accompanied him to say mass, and I got to be behind the sacristy.
Oh,
and so the icons, that kind of image stayed with me.
Oh yeah.
But after Ukraine, being there at that given time and meeting these very hopeful but much maligned under the Soviet Union people in Ukraine, and them going through a kind of a renaissance or reclamation of their Ukrainian history, which had been denied them all these years.
Yeah.
And it was a critical kind of juncture. They were on the cusp because the Soviet Union fell apart by the end of the year, and Ukraine gained independence. So that what was going on there was shattering, but also full of hope. And I was given a lot of gifts, like the embroideries, like lots of letters. Plus, I felt that their history was denied. They didn't know, for instance, about the 1930s Stalin induced famine. Some of them, because that was not taught in schools, and actually it was really denied by most of the world at the time. So when I came back to the States, when I came back home, I had all these gifts, and also I started collecting information and reading up about the Holodomor, which is the name given to the artificial famine that killed millions of people in 1932-33. Yeah. So that's already now being written about by historians like Timothy Snyder in Yale and others, and Applebaum. So it's documented finally. But I did the research, and I did a lot of photocopying from archival sources, which there weren't that many publicly available. But because it was denied and kept secret. And then I started making artwork dealing with that, and dealing with the photocopied text, and also incorporating these gifts, whether they were embroidery or letters or postage stamps, any of those kinds of things, including money that had some significance. So that makes it multimedia, because my compulsion to somehow make use of and reinvest this into some art. And I wasn't really sure whether it was going to be in the nature of a painting or a drawing, but collage assemblage kind of is the overall general group. And the drawing and the painting is always important to me, so it figured into that. And I guess in that way I became a multimedia person without really making a conscious decision.
You just felt just naturally driven to do these things. A hopefulness. I mean, I get that from your work. Even, it's like when you painted some in the nest thing, and some of it seems sort of done with love.
Oh, that's
these
nice
animals,
to hear.
And I'm drawn to that anyway, pretty much.
The best thing for an artist to hear is the viewer really engaging with the artwork on whatever level it may be for the viewer.
Yeah.
Because there's really nothing better than that, because I think every artist has to draw on their own,
Absolutely.
whatever it is that they're doing.
Yeah.
And so when the work goes out in public and people could actually engage in it in that kind of way, it's wonderful to hear.
Yeah.
Because I would play tricks with myself too, and I do always, where there's a work in progress or several works on the wall, and then my studio is right behind my house, so I come in the morning, let's say, and just look, turn the light on and look. And the animals in particular that were in Redbud recently, the dogs especially, they had to be beseeching, or they had to be have a certain kind of look to draw me in.
It worked.
To draw me in.
Yeah, they had.
And if it didn't, then I had to work it out.
Yes.
But I had to have my own connection
For sure.
with these animals who I felt were very much maligned also.
Yes, yes.
And so they were all these collaged pieces and political commentary about some of the horrible things going on. They, especially the dogs, man's best friend, they were actually absorbing it, and it was in their skin. It was like tattoos almost, but also they were a kind of a barrier protecting us, but they were looking for us for compassion and understanding.
Yeah.
So they weren't like growling, angry dogs.
And I think, and putting a dog in there, I mean, how many of us can relate to what we feel about, dogs, or just in general, that connection we have with them. So it really hit home, seeing first their expression, because I felt you captured a real
hopefully. Well, we're all part of the same animal world.
Yes, it's true.
So
I'd like to wake some people up to that, but
so
yeah, it's true.
I've never, as a child growing up, I grew up in the city, and we had our backyard, a little piece of nature, and of course everybody gardened and planted gardens and vegetable gardens in the Ukrainian community. But I now really love our little piece of backyard also.
Yes, it's magical.
And paying attention to those things that too many people, and I also earlier didn't pay attention to. It's not alive then for you. If you don't pay attention, it doesn't exist.
Yeah, that's true. That's
so part of it, even any artwork of mine or others, if, let's say, the content or the imagery is not really looked at, or then the experience is completely different than if somebody really opens up to it.
Yeah, I think it's amazing. I think still through art, it's amazing what can be conveyed versus just literally spelling it out in plain words. To not saying that something written couldn't be as effective, because certainly it can, but something about that visual impact is so valuable. Just gets in that.
Well, as an artist, you would say that.
I would say that, but I do feel that looking back even in history, how important art was in determining what was more or less going on at that time. So that something that large could be unnoticed or unseen or even not acknowledged, something on such a huge scale as so many people dying from.
And actually, in 1933, people in Ukraine were dying at a rate of 30,000 a day. Nearly a third of them children under 10.
Oh my God.
And so much of the work that I did referencing Holodomor were images of children. So between 1932 and 34, approximately 4 million deaths were attributed to starvation within the borders of Soviet Ukraine. Now, Stalin denied to the world that there was any terror famine in Ukraine and continued to export millions of tons of grain, more than enough to have saved every starving man, woman, and child. So denial, but this is the very difficult and disconcerting thing. Denial of the Holodomor by Soviet authorities was to be expected.
Yeah.
But it was echoed at the time by many prominent Western journalists, like Walter Duranty of the New York Times.
Oh my gosh.
He was the reporter stationed in Moscow dealing with the Kremlin. So that was where he was, and he knew what was going on in Ukraine, as it turns out, when he wrote his time in Moscow. He admitted to that. But he was awarded a Pulitzer Prize for the journalist work that he did in Russia. The Soviet Union refused any outside assistance because the regime officially denied that there was any famine. So anyone claiming the contrary was accused of spreading anti-Soviet propaganda. And outside the Soviet Union, Western governments adopted a passive attitude toward the famine, although most of them had become aware of the true suffering in Ukraine through confidential diplomatic channels. So it's hard to believe, but maybe not so hard to believe even today, that something like this could be covered up.
I know.
Dignitaries would come to visit the Soviet Union, invited by Stalin, and they would be taken to certain parts of Ukraine. It's all like a facade, and this is where it's more than propaganda. It's disinformation and complete lies.
Yeah.
So the dignitaries visiting really were denied an opportunity to even know what was going on.
So they actually believed it wasn't.
Right, and even when they became aware of what might be happening, because it's hard to cover up that many deaths and people dying
Yeah, that's a huge
throughout
amount.
and being shipped to remote areas in the Soviet Union and dying in transit.
Jesus.
Just like it's hard in Ukraine now, in the eastern part of Ukraine, to deny what is happening there, a war. If anybody actually knows the news, because there are people dying.
We don't even hear about this.
No, so this is where Walter Duranty, as a journalist, really did not do his job.
No.
And probably because he would have been denied access to Stalin if he had, and his life in Moscow, such as it was. But to make that trade-off, and then to be given a Pulitzer Prize,
Isn't that
and the New York Times still hasn't revoked it, and there has been pressure put on them to do that, because it's a lesson also and an example for journalists since that time.
Yeah.
And even today, journalism and true journalists are really valuable. I mean, and so if there are some who fall into a propaganda, they're not truly journalists, and we should make that distinction. And I think nowadays there is so much information out there on the internet as well as television and print media. I want to say I still think that print media is vetted more, and probably the information there is more accurate, but then I point to somebody like Walter Duranty at the New York Times, let alone any other publication.
Yeah.
So I guess one has to be aware of that and be open to take in other information, and not to be so dismissive,
Yeah.
and not to be so tribal.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. We haven't come very far, have we? It's just so, it's so hard. I feel like sometimes I'm living in a science fiction film, and we'll all wake up and go, no, we would never do that as human beings. This would not happen, right? It's just so crazy sometimes.
Well, you know, as a Ukrainian American, because I was born here. I was born in Cleveland, Ohio.
Yeah.
And but my parents wanted to pass on their cultural heritage, so my first language was Ukrainian. I went to Ukrainian school Saturdays, learned about Ukrainian history, and we lived in a community where there were lots of refugees from Eastern Europe. So I heard Polish spoken, you know, Czech, as well as Ukrainian. But growing up with people who have experienced that and have been in countries where, war, but also oppression and lots of propaganda operating, I think that, and also just leery of things that are translated loosely or dismissed out of hand. So I have been a little bit more careful, and I think if I did not have that part of my childhood, and in the United States and America of that era, you know, 1950s, 60s, it was a little different.
Yes, it was.
And as we had spoken earlier, you know, it depends on one's own experience.
It does.
But United States is really a country that is made up of immigrants from all parts of the world, and that's one of its strengths.
Yes.
I mean, probably the strength.
Yes.
And it is really a unique country in that respect.
Yes.
It was, you know, haven for democracy, rule of law. And so for me, it's very disconcerting, more than disconcerting, to see what has been happening in the United States in general, at least by the administrations. A kind of a disregard would be a kind way of putting it. To democracy, to Constitution, the rule of law, to the makeup of the people, the diversity, which are all strengths. I mean, those are the key building blocks of the United States.
So well put.
So you know, as an artist, you know, everybody has something to do and say, but I like to engage people in conversation. So through my art is one way.
Yes.
But other people, you know, because it is that kind of artwork, don't want to be engaged.
I know, that's true. Yeah, I've
so
seen that.
The content doesn't interest them.
Yeah.
And I find that really sad, to completely discount something that is happening, that is really changing the world, that is going to change one's life and future generations, that is really maybe not immediately concerning you personally at this moment, but the ramifications are great.
Yeah. It's so crazy because it's like, I know as an artist, for me, it stems from my own personal growth, what I'm doing. I never used to look at it that way so much, but I'm seeing a pattern that when I embark on in a direction, it's actually helping me grow and maybe evolve. But also just, I see that it might be helping others in some way, and which I think for sure happens with your work. And you even witnessed it with these young people, the one piece, you know, and that is so vital. It's about our growth and our facing, you know, how we can improve existence, life on Earth. I don't know, it's maybe getting a little too deep, but I think that's really what why do we motivate ourselves to create things? And, like that whole question,
It's an honor to be interviewed and actually to have some documentation of my thoughts, such as they are.
I am just so thrilled that you agreed to do this, and I think it'll be wonderful to share this with the tribe, and it's so important, I think, and I just think you have a real strong influence here in the city. Not only just where you teach, but your art form and the art community supports that, I think, and loves you in general. I get a really good feeling about it. So anyway, I'm just happy to be here, and
ditto for you
thank
too.
you.
Yes.
And I guess
I think you doing these interviews is great.
Oh, thank you.
Yes,
Appreciate
because I
that.
have enjoyed watching them.
It really has been fun. It's been especially. Thank
you. Put
you.
me at ease, and I appreciate it.
Oh, good. I'm glad you felt at ease. This is very laid back. This is supposed to be, and just a conversation. But I want to thank the viewers for watching. Please do share this. Give it a thumbs up if you like it, and we'll say goodbye.
Goodbye.
See you later.